for most of us in here, we will see acknowledgement of ET presence in our lifetime. And do you see the technology challenge you put out there could move separately without acknowledgement of an ET presence?
Good question. She asked if in our lifetime we would see an acknowledgement of an extraterrestrial presence. Ironically, what I just said a moment ago, I think we already have. I think the mass public already think that we're not alone. Now, so you have to then qualify, when will the elites acknowledge it publicly? Privately, a lot of the elites that I've been able to meet with will acknowledge it. Oh, yes. But then when you say, will you say that publicly? Oh, no, it's the end of my career. Whether they're a professor or a governmental person or a senator. No one wants to be Senator Moonbeam and ridiculed. So I think that the problem really is defining disclosure. And a lot of people say, when is disclosure going to happen? I said, we've done it already. When I started the project, there was only about 25% of the public thought this was real. Now it's 50, 60%. But in terms of, if your metric is the conventional wisdom, mainstream media, mainstream academia, mainstream governmental entities, your guess is as good as mine. And I'm not holding my breath. However, nor should we. We can go forward with this information independent of that. And that is the beauty of the internet, by the way. Because, you know, I can do a program and reach 1 million, 2 million, 5 million people. Whereas the ratings for, you know, Piers Morgan on CNN is a few 100,000, which is why they had to remove him. But, or Larry King, when I was on Larry King's show. By the way, interestingly, when the media tell you, well, we don't cover this because there's not public interest, after pornography, this is the #1 subject of interest on the internet. It's huge. Moreover, when I was on, I have a letter here from the producer for Larry King Live on the show I was on, you know, 19, 20 years ago, and she said, this is the most watched Larry King special we've ever had. So the metrics, Ancient Aliens for the History, the most lucrative and best franchise. So it isn't because the media wouldn't get numbers or the media wouldn't get lucrative advertising if they covered this. It's because their corporate bosses won't let them. Now, am I speculating? No. Let me tell you what happened with the executive producer of ABC Primetime Live in 2020. Back a few years ago, after the Disclosure Project was launched. And I'm not going to mention his name here, but he's a very nice guy from New York. He had been a producer for Mike Wallace at 60 Minutes and won an Emmy, and then went to New York with ABC News and was the executive producer for those 2 news magazines, Primetime Live in 2020. And he came out to our farm in Virginia, and I gave him 35 digital hours of military top secret testimony, all the documents he wanted and all the information he wanted. He says, either this is all the biggest hoax I've ever seen, or it's the biggest story of the 20th century. I said, I think you know it's the latter. He says, yeah, it really is amazing. So he went back to New York and then invited me up there, and I saw Sam Donaldson and some other people. And then I got a phone call. Now, before all this happened, I told him, I said, you know, I don't think ABC is going to let you do this. What he wanted to do was a series of news magazines like Town Hall with, you know, a lot of these military and other people there, with them discussing on ABC Prime Time in 2020 what they knew about this, and really blow the lid off this and then make a call for more to come public. So I thought, great, let's do it, but I don't think they will let you. And he says, oh no, I'm the executive producer of this show. So a bit of hubris, okay, and I just smiled and I said, well, let me know how I can help. A couple weeks later, he gives me a call. He says, Dr. Greer, they won't let me do this program. I said, oh, who are they? And he said, Dr. Greer, you know who they are. And that was it. Now, we've stayed in touch periodically since. Same thing with the movie industry, Hollywood. There was a very big producer, multi-billion-dollar guy who's done multi-billion dollars in gross revenues for films. And he sent someone to the 1997 congressional briefings we did that were closed here at the Westin Hotel in Georgetown, where we had all these military, the first sort of wave of these military witnesses who were willing to do this privately. And there were members of this, you know, the chairman of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee, Dan Burton, who issued 1,000 subpoenas on the Monica Lewinsky case, was there. All these people were there. White House people were there. Vice President Al Gore, some of his people. And Pentagon folks. And so he sent, this producer in Hollywood sent his senior person to attend just where nobody would know who she was. And it blew her mind. She went back and she said, this is the real X-Files without the nonsense. So this producer flew me out there, you know, the whole Hollywood two-step limousines, the whole bit. Flies out there, we're meeting at 20th Century Fox in his amazing office. He has a conference room full of people, of writers who've done all these big Oscar-winning movies and Emmy shows. And he says, I have a $60 million discretionary budget with Fox to make any film I want to make, and I want to make this one. I said, I'm not sure they will let you. He says, oh, of course they will. And he told me who he was again. I said, wonderful, glad to hear it. Well, put it together and I'll cooperate in every way I can. All I want to do is get the information out. I want a red cent. I'll give you, you know, you can just pick my brain. I'll give you all the data, all you want. And a couple weeks later, he calls and says, well, Dr. Greer, Fox won't let me do this movie. I said, I thought you said you had complete control over this $60 million. He says, not for this. It has to be a fiction. I said, well, I mean, Close Encounters of the Third Kind was a docudrama. That was fiction, but it was mostly based on true events, by the way. So Steven Spielberg did. And I actually, when I had dinner with one of his family members, and we talked about that, Spielberg's. And so the reality is that people think that Hollywood can do whatever it wants, the big media can do whatever it wants, a corporation in Silicon Valley that might discover this widget that will do this can do whatever it wants. What has happened to our freedoms? And this is, I mean, I know this sounds very kind of libertarian or Jeffersonian, but we have really lost anything resembling a free society on fundamental issues. And that should be of great concern. I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, left, right, socialist, whatever you are, which, you know, I don't subscribe to any of the political divisions, because really this issue transcends all of them. There have been people who are Democrats who love what we're doing, there are people who are Republicans who love what we're doing, and vice versa, who don't like it, depending on where their interests lie and how many checks they're collecting from these special interests, which is a lot. I mean, the oil industry and coal industry, utilities, they spread a lot of money around. It's like big farm. How much healthcare reform can you get when you have a multi-billion-dollar entity that's kind of bribing all the senators and congressmen and what have you? So, but this is that to a much larger degree than even the pharmaceutical industry, much larger. And I think we have to figure out a way to say, look, we're going to continue with acknowledging the ET presence and doing disclosure, and most importantly, I don't want to leave this out of this, it really doesn't matter if we have free energy if we go to interstellar war. We were talking about this at the break. So we need to have people who put out to the public a paradigm for contact that's peaceful, that is multilateral, that isn't polluted with all the usual fear-mongering and stereotypes of all things scary and alien. Because we need to be able to say, if we're already in an interstellar moment, and we are, even if it's not acknowledged fully, who's taking care of that relationship? Not Secretary Kerry at the State Department, not the UN officials I've met, not the people in foreign ministries I've briefed. It is not being tasked to any of them. So we, the people, need to come together and do that. It's like citizens diplomacy, but on an interplanetary level. And that's really why I formed the whole Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, which now has an app for a training app that you can get on your smartphone, but also now this networking app so you can plug into anyone in the community you want to plug into. that's near you. And you may have to travel an hour if you live in the remote area of Montana, but you know, you can do that. And I think it's very important for two reasons. One, it shows a face of humanity to these extraterrestrial civilizations that isn't just militaristic and avaricious, greedy. But it also creates its own, as Rupert Sheldrake talks about, morphogenic field, where in consciousness once, it's like the 100th monkey effect. Once a certain number of people start doing something, it begins to propagate non-locally and has an effect that is beyond just a linear one person to another, but actually shifts the great unconscious, if you will. And that is why it's so important for people to do that. So we move our civilization in the direction of universal peace and not interplanetary war. You know, because Douglas MacArthur in his last talk up here in congressional, to the Congress said, World War III will be interplanetary. Reagan stood up in front of the UN and said, wouldn't it be easier to unite the world if we had a common alien threat to unite against? Clinton recently, with Jimmy Fallon, made a similar sort of misguided statement. So, you know, there is this tendency that we want to take this issue and instead of having another race to fight or economic system to fight or religion to fight, let's find another planet to fight. Hallelujah! Instead of having world peace that is true world peace, let's unite the world in interplanetary conflict. Well, this is not going forward, my friends. This is a big step backwards. So we need calmer heads and more spiritually minded people to get involved in this so that our civilization doesn't get tricked into a sort of cosmic 9/11 or a cosmic Gulf of Tonkin, you know, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, when it's been substantially proven we basically exaggerated and staged these attacks on our ships in the Gulf of Tonkin so that Congress and the Johnson administration would be stampeded into expanding the Vietnam War. And that is not a myth. That actually has happened. It was proven to occur. So, you know, we have to be careful because the public are very easily affected by these sort of misguided patriotism of us versus them. Like the movie Independence Day. Let's kick alien butt, and Will Smith. You know, and this is the worst outcome. That's actually a worse outcome than if we have these new technologies and the world gets off oil and becomes united, but then we get maneuvered by these Machiavellian manipulators in the intelligence community into an interplanetary conflict. And I think that that's why there are three big projects that I've been focused on. The original one is the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, whose motto is one universe, one people. Because on the basis of just sentient conscious mind, the deep spiritual aspect of ourselves, we're all one being. But that led to the Disclosure Project because of the near landing event and sighting that happened in Gulf Breeze and Pensacola in the 90s. And now we're at this point of working on the technology. So those three components are really key to what we want to achieve. But the heart of it is really contact, peaceful contact with citizen diplomats.